Welcome to Prajam Technologies. I am Venkat. This is part 18 of SQL Server. In this session, we'll understand what a stored procedure is, a simple stored procedure example, creating a stored procedure with parameters, altering a stored procedure, viewing the text of a stored procedure, and finally we'll see how to drop a stored procedure. A stored procedure is a group of transact SQL statements. If you ever have a situation where you have to write the same query over and over again, you can save that specific query as a stored procedure and call it just by its name. Let's understand what we mean by this with an example. Now I have this table called TBL employee, which has got the ID, name, gender, and department ID columns. Let's say I want name and gender of an employee, so we type in select name comma gender from TBL employee. So every time I want the name and gender of an employee, I have to write this query. Okay, instead of that, what we can actually do is wrap this query inside a stored procedure and call that stored procedure rather than you having to write this query again and again. So how do we create a stored procedure? To create a stored procedure, we use create procedure command. So create procedure, and then you have to give this procedure a name. Okay, so SP, let us say get employees. Okay, since this procedure is getting us the employee name and gender, I'm giving it get employees. And look at this, in the name I have this letters SP. A common naming convention for stored procedures is that we usually prefix that with small letter s and small letter p, okay, indicating that just by looking at this name you can tell, okay, this is a stored procedure. Alright, so create procedure, procedure name, and then you will use as, begin, and end. Okay, so the definition of your stored procedure goes between this begin and end. Okay, so this is the body of your stored procedure. Okay, now when I execute this command, what's going to happen is a stored procedure with this name gets created in this database, which is nothing but sample that we have selected here. Okay, now if you want to look at the stored procedure that you have just created, you want to make sure whether if this procedure is actually created or not. Okay, go into that database, which is sample, and then you have this folder called programmability. Expand that and you should see a folder called stored procedures. If you expand that, we don't have it currently listed there. Just refresh that and you should see that stored procedure which we have just created, which is sp get employees. Okay, so anytime you want the name and gender of an employee, instead of writing this query again, what you can actually do is execute the stored procedure. Okay, so if you want to execute, you just need the name of the procedure. So what happens when I execute the stored procedure? Okay, to execute the stored procedure, you just highlight that and click execute, and you get the name and gender. You don't have to write that query anymore. Now you might be wondering, it's a very simple query, why don't I write that rather than having to create this procedure and then invoke it? Now this procedure may be simple. In reality, the procedures will be long. There are very stored procedures with over 3,000 of lines, for example. Okay, and not only that, there are several other benefits of using stored procedures, from security to network, reducing network traffic, etc. We will be talking about the advantages of stored procedures in a very great detail in a later session. Okay, so we use create procedure or create proc statement to create SP. I mean, you can either say create procedure or you can just say create proc for shortcut. Okay, to create a stored procedure. We'll talk about the naming convention of the stored procedures in just a bit. Okay, and to execute the stored procedure, we have seen how to execute that stored procedure. You just copy that, the name of the stored procedure, and you click this execute button, and what happens, the SQL statement within that stored procedure gets executed and it returns the name and gender columns. Alright, so that's one way to execute it. Or you can use the exec keyword and then click this, or you can use a full execute keyword and then again press F5. Or you can also graphically execute the stored procedure. Just right click on the stored procedure and select execute stored procedure. And the moment you do that, it shows this window. This procedure doesn't have any parameters, otherwise you will have to supply the values for the parameters. In just a bit we will see how to create a stored procedure that takes parameters. Now when I click OK, it executes that stored procedure. Look at that. Alright, so those are the different ways to execute stored procedure. Now let us look at a simple example of how to create a stored procedure with parameters. Okay, so let's go back to that table, TBL employees. Alright, now what I want to do is I want to create a stored procedure which takes two parameters, maybe gender and the department ID. Okay, for example, if I pass gender as male and department ID as 1 to your stored procedure, it should give me employees only within that gender and within that department. Okay, so your stored procedure needs to have these parameters. Okay, so let's see how to do that. So as usual, to create a stored procedure, we use create procedure command. So create procedure and give your procedure a meaningful name. So sp get employees by gender and department. Okay, so I want the employees by gender and department. Now look at this. Now this procedure, okay, the user who invokes your stored procedure is going to pass the stored procedure the gender and the department ID. So for them to be able to pass the values for gender and department ID, there should be parameters. Just like how functions have parameters in C# or any other programming language, stored procedures can also have parameters. Okay, so one is the gender parameter, and if you look at gender, it's text here, so the data type is going to be nvarchar of maybe 20, and department ID is going to be integer, so department ID integer as begin end. So the definition of your stored procedure goes in between these lines. Okay, so what do we want from the table? We want the name and maybe just the gender and also the department ID. From which table we want it? From TBL employee table. But we don't want all names, genders and department IDs. We want to filter them with what the user is going to pass in. He's going to pass in the gender and department ID. So we are going to say the gender column here should be equal to whatever the user is passing in at gender, and along the same lines, and department ID, let's bring this to another line, is equal to whatever the user is going to pass in. Okay, so these parameters are like placeholders. When users execute your stored procedure, they're going to pass in values for this gender and department ID, which will be replaced at execution time. Okay, so let's create the stored procedure. So to create that, select the entire stored procedure, click execute button, command completed successfully. Now if you refresh the stored procedures folder, you should see sp get employees by gender and department. Okay, now to execute this stored procedure, I just need the name of the stored procedure. And look at this. This stored procedure now is expecting gender and department ID parameters. Now look at this. If I don't pass the parameters and if I try to execute that stored procedure, see, highlight that and then press execute, what's going to happen? This procedure or function sp get employees by gender and department expects parameter at gender which was not supplied, and that makes sense. It's expecting a gender parameter which is not supplied, so we need to pass in the gender parameter. Since gender is of type nvarchar, I have to use single quotes, so I want the male employees within department ID 1, so department ID is 1. So these are the two parameters that this stored procedure expects, and we need to pass them. So when I press F5 now, look at that, I only get male employees within that department ID 1. Okay, on the other hand, if I want all the male employees in department ID 2, I can do so. Alright, now when you have parameters like this, what you're doing is you're just passing in the parameters. So this male value will be taken into at gender parameter, whereas this number one is passed into department ID parameter. Okay, now what happens if I put it the other way around? I am passing one first. Okay, so what's going to happen? It will take this one into gender, and 1 is an integer, but gender is of type nvarchar, and this 1 will be converted into nvarchar implicitly, no problem. But it comes to the second parameter, male. It tries to take this into department ID parameter, and if you look at the data type of department ID parameter, it is integer. Okay, so it tries to convert this string into integer, and it fails, and it throws an exception. Look at this. If I try to execute this now, I get an exception saying that error converting data type varchar to integer. So it is trying to convert this male string of type nvarchar into integer, and we get that error. Okay, so when you have multiple parameters that a stored procedure is expecting, and if you're passing just values, the values order, the order in which you pass them is important. Okay, the first parameter will be used, the value here, the first argument will be used with the first parameter, and the second argument will be used with the second parameter. Okay, that's why the order is important. But if you use the parameter names like this, let's say I want to pass 1 to at department ID, I can specify the name of the parameter like so. And similarly, I can specify the name of the parameter for gender. So when I execute this now, I will have no issues because you are specifying the name of the parameter. Okay, so SQL Server knows, okay, this one is meant to be the value for department ID parameter, and male is the value for gender parameter. It's only when you don't specify the names of the parameter, the order in which you pass the parameters is important. All right. And okay, so we have seen how to create a simple stored procedure and how to create a procedure with parameters as well, and we have seen how to execute them as well. Okay, now once you have the stored procedures, let's say I have created two procedures until now, SP get employees and SP get employees by gender and department. Now if I want to view the text of these stored procedures, what are the different ways that are available? One way is to simply right click on that stored procedure, script stored procedure as create to new query editor window. This generates the contents of that stored procedure. Look at this. This is the stored procedure definition that we have created. Create procedure, procedure name as begin end, and then our query. This is one way to look at the definition of a stored procedure. And the other way is to use a system stored procedure. These stored procedures that we have created here are user defined stored procedures. These are not system stored procedures. Now SQL Server has some system stored procedures defined, okay, and we use it for certain tasks. For example, I want to find the text of a stored procedure. How do I do that? I can use a system stored procedure called sp_help text. Okay, so look at this. This is the name of the system stored procedure, sp_help text. Okay, sp help text, and then if I pass in the name of the stored procedure there, sp get employees, and then when I select them together and execute this, look at this. I get the text of my stored procedure. You can then copy that, paste it here, and see how does the implementation of the stored procedure looks like. Okay, so to view the definition of a stored procedure, you can either right click on that script stored procedure as create to new query editor window, or you can use the system stored procedure sp_help text followed by the name of the stored procedure, which gives you the text of the stored procedure. Okay, now in this slide, if you look at this, whenever we name user defined stored procedure, Microsoft recommends not to use sp_help prefix for user defined stored procedures, because the reason is system stored procedures has that prefix. Okay, now if you happen to use sp underscore prefix for your user defined stored procedures, there are two problems. Number one, there will be an ambiguity between user defined stored procedures and system defined stored procedures. Just by looking at the name, we cannot tell, is this a user defined stored procedure or a system defined stored procedure. Okay, and another problem is with future releases of new SQL Server version, there may be name conflicts. If you create, let's say, sp underscore get date stored procedure, and in the future release there is a system stored procedure which is similarly named sp underscore get date, it's going to conflict with the user stored procedure. Okay, so to avoid problems like this, it's always better not to prefix user defined stored procedures with sp underscore prefix. Alright, so to change the stored procedure, now once we have created a stored procedure, for example, I have the stored procedure sp get employees. After I have created the stored procedure, let's say I want to change its implementation in some way. How do I do that? Let's say at the moment when I execute this sp get employees stored procedure, I'm not getting the names sorted, the names are basically not sorted. I want them to be sorted. So how do I do that? I will use the order by clause. So order by name. Okay, so I'm changing the implementation of this stored procedure. Now if I execute this create procedure once again, look at this, we get an error stating that there is already an object named spgetEmployees. Why? We already have that and we are trying to create that again with the same name. So obviously we get that error. Our intention here is to change the definition of that stored procedure, not to create another stored procedure. So if you want to change the definition of the stored procedure, then you say alter procedure, and I press F5, the stored procedure gets changed. Now if we execute that, we should have the name sorted. Okay, so we use alter procedure statement to change the definition of a stored procedure, and to delete the stored procedure we use drop procedure name. Just like if you want to drop a table, you will use drop table name. Okay, so similarly to drop a procedure, you will say drop procedure and procedure name. For example, I want to drop or delete sp get employees. I just pass it there. I press F5, and then if I refresh the stored procedures folder, it's gone now. It's deleted. Or what you can do alternatively, right click on that and select delete. Okay, now it's also possible to encrypt the text of the stored procedure, and it's very simple to do. For example, I have the stored procedure now, sp get employees by gender and department. Look at this. Now this is not encrypted at the moment, so when I use sp underscore help text and when I press F5, I am able to get the text of that stored procedure. So that's how the stored procedure is implemented. Now if I want to encrypt the contents, the text of the stored procedure, I can do that. How do I do that? All you have to do is to use this switch, this option with encryption. Okay, and we want to alter that, so I will say alter. Now when I press F5, look at this, command completed successfully, and now the moment I refresh this folder, look at this, we get a little lock symbol there indicating that this stored procedure is now encrypted. Okay, now if somebody tries to get the text of the encrypted stored procedure, we get a message saying that the text for the object is encrypted and we cannot retrieve the text of that. Okay, and you get the same kind of message when you kind of use script stored procedure as create to new query editor window. Okay, we get this error box. If you look at here, it says the text is encrypted. So once a stored procedure is encrypted, you cannot view the text of that stored procedure. But however, if you want to delete the stored procedure, you can go ahead and delete it. Just right click and select delete. It gets deleted, but you cannot view the contents of a stored procedure that is encrypted. Alright, in the next session, we will see how to create and invoke a stored procedure with output parameters. In this session, we have seen how to create a stored procedure with input parameters. In the next session, we'll talk about creating stored procedures with output parameters. On this slide, you can find resources for ASP.NET and C# interview questions. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.